So it's a pleasure now to welcome Ken Taylor to come and speak to us. We've met him already in the interview last night, but just to remind you, Ken was telling me that he actually has two jobs. He has a full-time job as a professor in a seminary, and he also has a job as a church pastor. So that's effectively two full-time jobs, I think, isn't it? Yes. And maybe one or two of you know how that works. I can't say that I do. And as he told us last night, he was pastor of the Elysian Fields Baptist Church, a church which then merged with another church after all the horrors of Hurricane Katrina. And his seminary job is professor of urban missions at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and he told us a bit about that as well last night. But prior to moving to New Orleans, you practiced law in Alabama and then went on to do your Master of Divinity and PhD at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. And in his ministry and in his work, he's been involved in disaster relief and teaching about disaster relief. And it's a great pleasure to have you over here to speak to us this morning. So over to you, Ken.
Thank you so much. It is wonderful to be here. A real honor to be in this class of the Revd Institute. I just really enjoyed my time here. I have learned much and appreciate very much the opportunity to be here. And I am very happy to be in Great Britain. It's the first time that I have been here, and it is really good to finally visit the land of my ancestors, particularly one ancestor, that is Geoffrey Chaucer. A free search on Ancestry.com showed that he was my 15th or 16th removed grandfather. I have very little confidence in that search, but it was a good talking point as well. Another family tradition is that one of our ancestors was a falconer for one of the royal family of Great Britain. And then still a less impressive tradition is that another member of my family was in Ireland and had a not too successful romantic encounter with a person of high social standing and was invited to leave the country and wound up in the United States. I'm not sure how true that is either, but it is wonderful to be here, and I'm looking forward to coming back. My wife, I invited her to come. She had so much to do at work that she couldn't come. I got over here and began posting some pictures on Facebook, and she immediately said, I should have come. I should have come. So it is very good to be here. There's another picture of Chaucer with some of his merry band there. I'm not going to, as Jonathan gave, a 30,000-foot view, or not even as Roger gave a 20,000-foot view, but a view from 5 feet below sea level. New Orleans, much of it is actually below sea level. Someone asked me after the flooding of Katrina, probably 2 or 3 years afterwards, how long was it before you did not mention Katrina in a sermon? And at that point I said, well, I'll let you know when that happens. And it was probably about year 4 or 5 when that happened. 1 year after Katrina, we had just moved off the sidewalk. We initially, of course, we lost our building. I was at Elysian Fields Baptist Church. That building was destroyed. We had to bulldoze it, and we met in another place that I'll show you in a little bit. But we had just moved to Gentilly. We actually met outside on the sidewalk for a number of months. On our second anniversary, we were in the gym of Gentilly Baptist Church. During years 2 and 3, we were still in the gymnasium, working on the sanctuary, trying to get it put back together. At the end of year 4, we were almost ready to move back into our renovated sanctuary. We got in November of '09, and the next 6 months were spent celebrating being able to be in a real church sanctuary. Another reason that it was so long before I did not talk about Katrina in my sermons is that all of our people's homes flooded. I think we actually had 2 people who did not flood, but everybody else flooded and lost almost everything that they owned. These homes were flooded with between 4 and 12 feet of dirty salt water, and every few weeks at that time we would have another family moving back to New Orleans after having been evacuated for 1 to 4.5 years. And still, every 6 months or so, we meet a new family that has actually just moved back after a very long evacuation at this time. Also, people were dealing with the loss of family and friends. Some had died in the floodwaters or from stress-induced illnesses that followed the trauma of Katrina. More continued to come back. Cities like Houston, Texas gained tens of thousands of New Orleanians as their new residents. People coming home were coming home to churches and neighborhoods totally unlike anything that they had ever known before. All experienced the immediate trauma of a storm that did what few had predicted. Much of our city, as you know, is under sea level. 300 years ago, almost to the day, no one knows the exact day, in April or early May, that Bienville began chopping through the cane along the Mississippi River for his new settlement. Frenchman Bienville began clearing the highest ground on a bend in the river for the French capital of our part of the world. He had been ordered to find another location, one that was more elevated than the present site of New Orleans was. The Mississippi River soon rose after the first buildings were built, and for about 6 months, the streets of the small new city were flooded with up to 6 inches of water constantly during that time. Soon, though, the value of the location of New Orleans was proved, as it was essential for protecting the river, the navigation up and down the river, as the French and then the Spanish and finally the Americans were to determine and to gain ownership of the city. As New Orleans expanded over the next 2 centuries, the expansion put the map of the city over low marshland and swamplands. This required digging of many canals that became major outflow canals lined with some of the biggest pumps in the world, so that the rainwater could be pumped out. New Orleans is like a bowl, often described as a bowl. Along the French Quarter here, some relatively high ground from thousands of years of the river flooding and putting silt along. So the river was actually slightly higher than the rest of the city. So the city was built here, but the area back here was lower, with swampland. It has also sunk in the intervening centuries because the levees put along the river, of course, keep the life-giving sediment from coming into the city, so the land is gradually sinking somewhat. So many homes are having to be re-leveled, their foundations secured, but because it is underground, it needed some work, and it left us particularly vulnerable to flooding. Number one, the city is an island, totally surrounded by water, by the Mississippi River, by Lake Pontchartrain, by the inmost parts of the Gulf of Mexico. So we're totally surrounded by water. below sea level, which adds a little bit of danger to flooding. At the time of Katrina, multiple outflow canals provided a direct route from Lake Pontchartrain into the city, and I'll show you those in just a moment. And then so many disadvantaged people who lived in substandard housing and who had no way to evacuate were particularly vulnerable after the flooding of the city. Now, this is a picture of some of the outflow canals. And an outflow canal is simply a canal dug so that rainwater that comes in would not settle and create a big lake there. So canals were built and pumps put on those canals to pump water out, so thus outflow. The 17th Street Canal, which at one time had the largest pump in the world on it. Since then, others in New Orleans have been added that are larger. We have the Wisner Canal and the London Avenue Canal right here. And this is the one that flooded our church. It broke about right here, and then it broke on this side on this way. So flooded our part of town. But these outflow canals did not have gates at the entrance. This is Lake Pontchartrain up here. And these outflow canals were simply open into the lake so that when the Gulf of Mexico, because of Katrina, the storm surge came in, it pushed water into the lake. The lake is connected to the Gulf. And the lake, which rose by many feet, then pushed water down these canals. All of these canals. And the canals were actually built improperly. It was not known exactly what was down under those canals, but there was sand and various kinds of vegetative matter that had not completely degenerated. And the anchors to these walls had been placed in unsteady soil. So when the water rose in these canals, instead of overtopping the canals, the canal walls fell over from the pressure of the water. So that happened in the Lower Ninth Ward. It happened on London Avenue. It happened especially on the 17th Street Canal with some other flooding on some of the other canals. But major canal breaches, wall breaches here, and London Avenue, and in another canal that is a navigation canal that connects to the Lower Ninth Ward. When the water came in, it began to flood the city. Roger showed a similar picture to this, but this is a satellite view of the city. You can see here, this is the 17th Street Canal. It broke on this side, pouring water this way. This is Jefferson Parish, adjoining New Orleans. It had some minor flooding, but not because of the canal breach. But you can see the deep water around here. It's only along the river. We call it the sliver along the river. Did not flood because it was naturally high ground. Also, a slight area along Gentilly Boulevard here that was some naturally high ground. This may have been one time the course of the Mississippi River or the lakefront of Lake Pontchartrain, but there was some naturally high ground there. This picture shows a map of the deaths in New Orleans. Now, each dot, I guess, represents more than one death because we had approximately 1,300 people die in New Orleans from the flooding and the stress of being in an attic in 100-degree heat for hours there. You can see the particularly high density here, and this is the Lower Ninth Ward here, where the canal broke right here, and a 14-foot wall of water just rushed in. The breach there was about 300 yards long, so it moved in quickly, pushed houses always throughout streets and throughout the neighborhood. So there was a large number of people that died in this area, but they were also scattered throughout all the flooding areas. And you see, even in some of the non-flooded areas, I guess people without electricity maybe died from the heat throughout New Orleans East, as well as into St. Bernard Parish that is just east of Orleans Parish, New Orleans, along here. But this is the area here that was flooded because of the poor canals, the canal walls that were built. The lake overtopped the canals here, overtopped the levees, overtopped the levees here, and overtopped the levees here. But all of this flooding was because of breached levee walls. The water did not get high enough to go over the walls, but it pushed them over. So the flooding happened, and one of the most graphic quotes I saw immediately after the storm was from Associated Press on September 4th, 2005. This quote that has stuck with me. It says, "A once vibrant city of 480,000 people, overtaken just days ago by floods, looting, rape, and arson, was now an empty, sodden tomb." I read this from a distance, being evacuated in North Alabama, and this was just so sad to read about the city I had been in at that time for 23 years, 24 years, and to see this about my city. And we all wonder, will the city come back? Many were doubting that it could. Many were doubting that it should come back. Through the years, various hurricanes had ravaged sections of New Orleans, mainly with wind damage. Hurricane Betsy in 1965 actually caused the flooding of parts of the city, and it was only surpassed by Katrina. These new walls along the outflow canals proved to be ineffective, but few really saw those failing walls that would be the cause of the flooding of New Orleans. Scenarios were in many other ways. One neighbor who lived just behind Gentilly Baptist Church, where I pastor now, came outside of his home when the worst of the weather of Katrina had come through, maybe 8:30 a.m. His house and most of the houses in the city had little or no damage, just some shingles, a few tree limbs down. There were a few buildings that suffered more severe damage, but his house was okay. He walked outside, began surveying the damage, and saw everything was pretty good. But while he was outside, he heard a noise coming from toward the lake. And he looked up the street, and there was a wall of water coming down Eid Street, which becomes DeMontlezin Street, near our church. And it was pushing debris in front of it. Garbage containers and other loose items were coming, so it was quite a noise. And he saw this wasn't just a few inches of water, so he ran back into his house, grabbed his family, said, "Come with me," and they began to make their way right across the street to our 3-story education building of our church. He was able to break in, and have no problem with him breaking in to save his family's life. And he and his family went to the 2nd and 3rd floors of that building, and they were joined soon by others, and there were about 17 people that stayed in the church for about 3 days, until some were rescued off the roof by helicopters. Others were rescued from lower down by boats that came and rescued them. This provided for me a picture of what our church ought to be: a place of life-saving, a place of rescue, a place of safety, and we were happy that it was able to be that, and we just hoped afterwards that we could be that for the residents as they were coming back. Approximately 3 days after the storm, waters from the Gulf of Mexico began to go back into their normal course because the hurricane was gone. Lake Pontchartrain began to drain into the Gulf of Mexico, and soon the water in the canals lowered so that the water began to flow out through those breaches and back into Lake Pontchartrain and eventually into the Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers brought in multiple large pumps to begin help with the natural flow. And after 18 days, they declared the water is now gone. Now, of course, there was still water in buildings, but the water on the ground, for the most part, was gone. Soggy and salty, in some places silty, in some places 6 to 8 feet of silt left behind. But our churches, the church where I was at the time of Katrina, as well as Gentilly, we didn't have much mud, just lots of water, lots of mold, lots of mildew left behind. And we began then to see what was to do. Elysian Fields Baptist Church had had some problems with the structure of our sanctuary. It was built improperly, so a civil engineer told us that the laminated beams were half as thick as they should have been when the church was built in 1964. I saw the original plans for that church, and it was supposed to be steel beams that they used, but I guess to save money or maybe for aesthetic purposes, they chose to use these laminated beams. The design of the roof was not very good, and it began to leak almost immediately. And through the years, this leaking and the invasion of Formosan termites into the city caused one of those beams to lose much of its strength. And that civil engineer tell us, you ought not to worship in here anymore until you do something about that. So we had begun the process. We had moved into our fellowship hall. We were thinking of ways, raising money to refurbish our building, and actually had quite an exciting time immediately before Katrina. We had the Sunday before Katrina hit, or 8 days before it hit, we had probably the highest number of visitors we had ever had. Things were looking good. People were excited. And suddenly, the building would be no more. We had to bulldoze the church, and were not able to save it. And I'll show you pictures of that in a moment. You saw a few on the video that we watched the other night. Isaiah 43, 1 through 3 became very important for everybody in New Orleans, especially at the seminary and our church. But the words were very appropriate for our setting. But now this is what the Lord says. He created you, Jacob. He who formed you, Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. While waters had covered our stuff, for the most part, we were safe, and we felt the Lord's protection and help. Just after that, for quite some time to go. I want to show you first. Not showing, but it's just a short video clip of a family in St. Bernard Parish. As the water comes up, shows the wind and the rain, and then it shows the water 3 feet deep, and then the water 8 feet deep, and then the water 14 to 18 feet deep, and them reacting to that. And it was quite a tough time for them, but they did survive. After the storm, I remember driving into the lower Ninth Ward. There were no birds in New Orleans initially. We had once been a place of course, many birds, but immediately after the storm, the birds were gone. Didn't know if they were dead or just moved to better places. But one day I was driving through the lower Ninth Ward, and I came, this is not the picture I took, but it's similar to this. There was a dead tree. Crows were in the tree calling out their names. It looked like a scene from a horror show. So we had crows, and then we had starlings, nothing else. But one weekend we came in to do church. We began church in January of '06. And at the beginning of the weekend, I saw a dove fly. It was wonderful to see something beside a crow or starling. And especially symbolic was the dove that I saw. That was at the beginning of the weekend. Just before I left, going back to Alabama, after our church services, I saw this in the sky, a rainbow. Again, not this rainbow. It was another rainbow. This one just happens to end in the French Quarter in New Orleans. But I thought, how symbolic for this weekend, the dove and the rainbow. And things began to pick up, and soon the birds began to come back. So mockingbirds and just birds of all kinds now, and they're plentiful, as many or more than there were before Katrina now in our city. This is what our church looked like after the destruction crew began to do its work. We were told that the building could not be salvaged because of the structural problems we had already and the serious flooding. Elysian Fields Baptist Church was built with bricks, blocks, and wood, and not the steel and concrete that it should have had. I'll tell more about Gentilly later. So we had to tear down the building and see it totally brought down and hauled away. And we had intended to go back to that location to be Elysian Fields Avenue Baptist Church once again. I had years of my life tied up as pastor of that church. I was deeply invested. My ego was deeply invested in the name and in that corner. But as we began to meet there, we met in some other places, and we wound up at Gentilly, and I'll say more about that in just a minute. But not only did our church meet in the facility of Elysian Fields Baptist Church, we had several other ethnic churches that used our building as well. We had a French-speaking church. The pastor was from the Democratic Republic of Congo, as I shared with Linda the other day, and he had French-speaking people from other countries in Africa, as well as a few French-speaking islands in the Caribbean. We had a Korean church that met in our facility, and we had an Indian church that met there as well. We also had a mentoring organization that used space in our church. These three ethnic churches disappeared. Their pastors moved. The Indian pastor moved to Detroit and began a new church in Detroit. The Francophone pastor eventually wound up in Iowa and began a Francophone church in Iowa. And the Korean pastor wound up in Atlanta and began a new church there. The mentoring organization was inactive for a number of years and has since begun operation once again. When we came back and had our first church service in January of 2006, I actually misspoke on the video, and I said 2007, but it was actually January 24th, 2006. We met in the gutted house of Bob and Linda Jackson, who were members of our church, and it was cold that day. There were no bathroom facilities, but it was the warmest service I've ever been in. We had 100% of our members that were in town there, 24 of them. And we gathered together, and some of us had not seen the others since Katrina. So it was a great reunion, a great time of fellowship. I wish we could have had a fellowship meal, but no one really had the facilities to fix a meal, and there weren't many places to eat at this time in New Orleans as well. This was what the house looked like when we weren't in it, and there was a cross, interestingly, there at one spot, and this cross was from a fire that had occurred in that house many years earlier, and that was one of the repairs that left a makeshift cross there, which we thought was very appropriate. We met there until June of 2006. At that time, Bob and Linda needed to complete the repairs on their house, so we needed to get out of their hair. And Dr. Dennis Cole, who is a colleague of mine at New Orleans Baptist Seminary and also a longtime member and kind of on the staff as an administrator at Gentilly Baptist Church, which was not meeting, had not started having services again, and their pastor had moved to Houston, so was not coming back. He invited us to come use the second floor Sunday school space that they had, which would be air conditioned. Of course, it wasn't air conditioned when we thought it would be. It was a year after Katrina before electricity was restored to that church, but we did have a place to meet, as I mentioned, on the sidewalk there in that church. Finally, we got electricity after 1 year after the storm, moved into the Sunday school room and met there. This is what Gentilly looked like inside after the storm. Gentilly had deeper water than Elysian Fields had, 7 feet in all the buildings of Gentilly. About $1 million worth of damage to Gentilly. Elysian Fields probably had about $900,000 worth of damage. It was really a total loss. This another view of that. There was a baby grand piano on the platform. It turned upside down, and a pew floated on top of the baby grand piano. Another view of the sanctuary. So all the contents of all of our buildings, the 3 buildings, education building, sanctuary, and the gym, had to be moved to the street and done away with. This was a view of the outside of the church building, and you can see the lines as the water began to gradually recede, leaving lines behind. These are some pictures taken from New Orleans Baptist Seminary, where I lived at the time. Seminary had probably $60 million worth of damage to it during that time. The water was 6 to 8 feet deep. This is actually taken from about the spot where I live now. This was my house. This is what so many of the houses in New Orleans look like. They had this marking on it. This is an international marking used by rescue units around the world. The top marking was the date the house was searched. This was the marking of the group that did the searching. There were firemen, firefighters, National Guard units, Army, all kinds of official folks that looked. On this side was supposed to be toxic or dangers, like gas leaks, which they didn't find much of, Some of them just had TFW, toxic floodwater. Sometimes they just put ATT, meant we only searched the attic because the water was high. But down here was the marking of how many bodies were found in the house. You can see that 0 were found in this one. But of course, many, many homes had the 1 or the 2 or the 3, and probably some had 4, where multiple people died in the process of that. But we saw the importance of partnerships from the very beginning. Partners began to come in and help us. At Gentile, the first groups came and helped take all the wet debris to the street. As they did that, and then they did pressure washing, and then put fungicide in the building. So these volunteers were essential because, again, our church members weren't back and couldn't come back until their houses were ready. We saw the importance of partnerships. They provided, first of all, encouragement. I remember as we were worshiping, and we would have a very small handful of folks worshiping with us. When a group of 20 or 30 volunteers came in and worshiped with us, that was a real boost to us, to see other people worshiping with us and not just our little handful of folks. We also saw that partners worked, and oh, did they work. They worked in our buildings. They restored our first floor of our education building and put in a kitchen and put in showers so that volunteers could begin to come in and stay there. And they did sleep on the second and third floors, and then they began working on our gym to get it ready for volunteers to come in as well. Partners gave. We had churches that we had no contact with prior to Katrina sent us money, sent us help to begin the restoration process, and to even to help some church staff out. So they were a blessing to us in many, many ways. Not everybody saying they wanted to partner with us did partner with us. I remember late October or early November, a church from another state called and said, "We'd like to adopt you." The mission board was putting us out for adoption, and a number of churches in other states adopted us. They said, "We'd like to adopt you, and we're going to make our first mission trip down there during Thanksgiving, a holiday for us, and we're going to work in your neighborhood." Well, we had already determined by that time our church could not be refurbished. It would have to be torn down. We didn't have a place for them to stay, and they had asked for us a place to stay. And we really didn't have anything for them to do at Elysian Fields at that time. We said, "We would love for you to come, but this isn't the best time to do that. This is a holiday weekend. There won't be as many people around. We don't have a place for you to stay, but we do need people to come and prayer walk in the neighborhood. Could we set up another time?" They said, "Well, we'll get in touch with you." I haven't heard from them since. And that's been 12 years ago. So not everybody saying they want to volunteer will do that. We had other churches that adopted us that decided that we weren't the child they wanted, and they adopted another church. We had other churches that had not formally adopted us that treated us better than a parent. So we had an ample number of churches that helped us in so many ways and were a huge, huge blessing for us. We could not have come back as we did without what they did for us. Partnerships don't last forever. And we've already talked in several encounters, what do you do when the volunteers quit coming? And we had to get ready for that. We had to get ready. And really we were a little better prepared for that when the volunteers slowed down and weren't there as often. And we took advantage of those that kept coming and put them to work really hard in that. But they do eventually stop coming. And talk about there as well. One of our partners was InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, in particular InterVarsity New England. InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, as I understand it, had its beginning here at Cambridge and spread to Canada and then to the United States. And it's a wonderful organization. And they began bringing groups down to help in New Orleans. And they called it CRUP, Katrina Rebuild Urban Plunge. And they would bring usually every March. Sometimes it started in January and ended in, and there were some in February as well. But they would bring 300 to 400 students down during every spring semester during a break. And they would work in homes. And they worked very hard. And they were wonderful partners. And they would also bring non-believers with them from other countries, many. And during that time, they would, as these non-believers worked with the believers, they would share Christ with them. And every year they would have maybe 40 to 50 students that expressed a new faith in Christ through that. And many others who said they were beginning a faith journey with Christ. So they were wonderful partners with us for many years. But starting just this year, we've just finished March, this was the first year in 6 or 7 years that InterVarsity has not been with us because they're going to Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge, Louisiana had some severe flooding a year and a half ago. So some went there, and many others went to the Houston area after the flooding last year with Hurricane Harvey. So they're being well used, and then still others of them going to Puerto Rico to work there. So it was time for them to go where they were more needed. Fortunately, the Lord provided other volunteers to come in and stay with us during that time. So we had lots of volunteers that came and worked in various capacities in our city during this time. So since 2006, we have housed approximately 16,000 volunteers in our building. And it's been a real blessing to us. Several years ago, the fire marshal came by ostensibly to check a fire suppression unit on our stove. And he looked in the gym and he said, "Oh, Padre, what is that?" As he saw a bunk bed in a room. Of course, he well knew that we had been housing volunteers for years, but I think he had decided we've given them long enough. He said, "You're not equipped to house volunteers here now. You're going to have to get a sprinkler system and update your smoke alarm for that." So he chased folks out of our building. We put them in the other building, which he had not specifically said don't do. He found that out a couple of days later and said, "Not there either." And we began a process and spent about $150,000 to put sprinklers in one of our buildings and to update the smoke alarms and all so that we could legally house volunteers, which we can do now and have been busy doing that. So we were thankful for their forbearance with us for the years because they realized how much these volunteers were doing during that time. These are some volunteers that stayed with us one time. By the way, Samaritan's Purse helped put this playground in at our church, which was a real blessing. They offered to do this several places for the city of New Orleans, and the city of New Orleans said no thanks, too many liability issues. So they built this playground here, and it's lasted now 11 years, and nothing has broken on that playground since. And it's had lots of big people on it, as you can see there. This is Jackie and Linda James. Jackie was the coordinator for the Arkansas Baptist Convention who brought in volunteers. The Arkansas Baptist Convention probably spent well over $1 million, maybe up to $2 million around our church, at our church. They put in a new kitchen in our building. They provided all the stoves and refrigerators and so forth, commercial size. They also paid our power bill for 2 or 3 years, which helped us tremendously. But Jackie and Linda coordinated the volunteers that came in during that time, and were able to rebuild about 200 homes and 4 to 5 churches. And they actually still come down occasionally. The convention, Arkansas Baptist Convention, put a little travel trailer on our property, and that's Jackie and Linda's home when they come to New Orleans. But they have been invaluable partners with us and still partner with us. The Louisiana disaster relief folks, as well as disaster relief folks from other states, have come. This is a division of the Southern Baptist Convention. Each state convention has its own disaster units ready to feed, to repair, to gut houses, and so forth. This is a block party that we had in November of 2006. A church in Paducah, Kentucky, that had initially come in and helped gut our church said, we'd like to feed your church and do a block party for the neighborhood. So we invited our neighborhood, wondering if 100 would come out, but almost 400 people from the neighborhood came out to the block party, and as many adults as teenagers and children. This was before there was anything to do in our neighborhood. So there was finally something to do. There was good food to eat, and we just saw a lot of things happen, and some of those people began coming to our church as a result of that. And then as a result of them coming to our church, we could no longer fit our congregation in a Sunday school room, so we had to move into our gutted sanctuary, again with no heat, no bathroom facilities, and spent a long, cold winter worshiping there before our gym was completed in March of 07. But this was a real turning point for us and helped us in our community, and it was a partner. Partners are just so essential for that. Just a few lessons that I wrote down about disasters, and I wrote these down some time ago. And as I've gone over them, they still seem true. People need comfort during and after a disaster. I know I did, and my family needed comfort. We evacuated to North Alabama. We went to church where my mother was going to church, and my whole family joined us. We had 15 or 16 folks there that day. Not all of them lived with us. It was just my wife and our 2 children, myself, in our home. But we had come to live with my grandmother, brought the grandmother and her 2 grandchildren with us, and then our 2 sons that were already out of the home came, as well as some friends and my brother and his family. So we had a big crowd of folks there. So I couldn't wait to hear some comforting words that day through a sermon or through something else. I didn't really hear that. The pastor preached a sermon. It was okay, but it in no way dealt with disaster. It in no way dealt with hurting people. And of course, I didn't expect a sermon just for myself, but I would expect it just a little bit. And as the service was over, all of our folks kind of looked at each other and said, boy, something was missing today. But that was a wonderful lesson for me. Maybe that's one reason I mentioned Katrina in my sermons for 4 years in a row, because I realized that people need some comfort. They need some help. So I learned a great deal in that process. Interestingly, just a month after Katrina, I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota for a conference, Evangelical Missiological Society meeting, that I was presenting a paper. And as I sat down during one of the sessions, I sat down beside a man and we began talking. He found out I was from New Orleans, and he said, "Oh, I have just recorded a series of sessions to put on radio stations around the country just for Katrina survivors, to help them deal with the trauma and the stress, and I'm so proud of what the Lord has allowed me to do." And he went on and on about his spots, and never once did he ask me how I was. Never once did he said, "Do you need any help?" And I could have used some counseling at that time, I'm sure, because I was still feeling some effects of the trauma. So I learned again a lesson, minister to the people by you, close to you, that are in contact with you. People want help. People need help of all kinds. But people are resilient. Saw senior adults that were able to rebuild their homes. Bob and Linda Jackson, I told you with, they were close to the senior adult age. They had never done any building before in their lives. They went and bought some books on how to be carpenters, and they rebuilt their house themselves. They hired the electrical work done, they hired the plumbing work done, but all the carpentry work, all the sheetrock work, all the plaster work, they did themselves. People are resilient and can do a lot. People remember the help they're given. We still have people that will come by or maybe send a check saying, y'all helped us, we want to help y'all during this time as well. God works in the aftermaths of disaster. We've been hearing that all weekend. Disasters are frequent, as we well know. Be careful about what you say, but not too careful. You want to be sensitive to people. We had a volunteer one day. Our minister of worship was gone, and we were looking to see if maybe there was a worship leader in our volunteers that were there that Sunday. And one of the volunteers said, yeah, I do that. I lead worship. So he got up to lead worship, and as he started, he said, well, here we are in stinky New Orleans. And then he said, who would have ever thought anything good could happen in New Orleans? He thought he was speaking to all volunteers. He didn't realize that he was speaking to what members we had back at that time. We had one of the major newscasters in our city at that time was on the top-ranked local talk show, morning show of any TV station in New Orleans with CBS. She was visiting that day, and she told her friend that she was visiting with, if he had said one more thing about New Orleans, I was leaving. Fortunately, she joined our church a little later, and that didn't totally turn her off to that. People like to share their disaster experiences. It's good therapy, and we've all been there. Listeners are needed. People just need somebody to listen. I needed to share my story for a number of years. I finally got over it. I don't have to share it anymore. I don't mind sharing it, but it was very cathartic in those first months and years especially. People are changed by disasters, many for the good, some for the not so good. People are often open to the work of God during disasters. Michelle was from France. She was married to a Jewish man. She was nominally Catholic. She was very fortunate in she didn't get cheated by a contractor. About 30 to 40% of people got cheated out by building contractors who took their money and ran, or took their money and didn't do anything. Well, she got a good contractor. First of all, she had good flood insurance. She had the money to fix her house. She and her husband, they had a good contractor. He did the work quickly, and they were back in their house soon. But they were the only ones in their neighborhood. And then her husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she was not doing well mentally. And she went to a doctor, and he suggested some medicine for her. She said, I don't want to take that, too many side effects. And then someone she knew said, well, why don't you try church? She said, well, I've tried everything else. Why don't I try church? So she showed up with us. The first day we moved out of our gutted sanctuary into our semi-completed gym, which was comfortable, and we had chairs there, and she showed up, and our people fell in love with her. She fell in love with us, and we saw some good things happened with her, and I'll finish her story in just a minute. The church must respond to disaster. If we don't respond, there's something wrong. There is something wrong. And we learned that buildings are not nearly as important as we thought they were. We found out worship on the sidewalk was just fine. We had a shade, and it wasn't too hot most of the time. Cars would drive by, and they would stop and take pictures of this little church worshiping out on the sidewalk. But we learned, we didn't have to worry about keeping the carpet clean. We didn't have to worry about anyone tracking in anything. We were just free to worship. And it was freeing indeed. Of course, I love being in a sanctuary now, but when someone drops gum on the carpet or burns a candle and gets wax on the carpet, you got those things to deal with now. But buildings aren't near as important as we thought they are. Just quickly, the story of the lamps. A company in Arkansas sent 700 lamps down for us to give away in our neighborhood. I thought, who wants lamps? And they sent 700 lamps, 10,000 lampshades. And the lampshades were harder to give away. But one day we announced that we were giving the lamps away. After church was over, we had them in our gutted sanctuary. So people immediately went over to the sanctuary and started getting lamps. And they would come out of the sanctuary and they'd be on their phones. Hey, come over to Gentilly Baptist Church. They got lamps here. And soon we had a traffic jam in front of the church because people had come to get lamps. They had heard from their neighbors. And to me, this was the perfect example of the way the gospel ought to spread. They got the gospel at church. Matthew 5:16, the same way let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. One thing we did was what we called a Peels Walk after this, savoring the multiple layers of post-Katrina New Orleans, and simply a Peels Walk was a modified prayer walk. Prayer, evangelism, exploration, listening, and serving. We would walk through and pray in neighborhoods. We would do evangelism as we had the opportunity to. We would explore. Who needs work done? Who needs work done? I remember in one Peels Walk, we were looking for somebody that had a sheetrock job to do. Somebody had called me a few hours before and said, we'll be there in a few hours. We would like to do sheetrock work. I didn't have a sheetrock job at that time, but I went on a Peels Walk. This family was pulling weeds in front of their house. I stopped to help them pull weeds, and I said, by the way, do you know anyone that needs sheetrock work? They said, yes. Their house got sheetrock the next day. So you find jobs, listening to people, and serving people. So Peels Walk, and I'll just go through that quickly, but there. The use of our church building now, we have worship on Sunday mornings at 10:30 in the sanctuary. We have Bethel Community Baptist Church that meets at 8 a.m. Bethel Transformation Ministry is a ministry. One section's for men, one for women. Women at the Well, they have about 200 people with drug and alcohol problems, and it's located near the seminary. And they come and worship at our church at 8 o'clock. And they have a large crowd, almost fill our sanctuary up. We have an Ethiopian Eritrean church that meets at 11 o'clock in one of our Sunday school rooms. We have, of course, volunteers staying in the church still. One church used our gym for 3 years after it's lost its building after Katrina. And another one just finished using our gym as their worship center for a year after they lost their sanctuary in a tornado on February 8th of 2017. So it was good to let other folks use the building as well. We have a homeless ministry in our gym every Friday night. Neighborhood youth have Bible study and basketball on Wednesday nights. And then we have neighborhood groups that use our building. We have people that will ask to borrow our sanctuary for funerals, for repast, which is a meal after a funeral, which is very traditional in New Orleans, to have a big meal after the funeral, and then weddings, so we get to use it a lot. Conclude with this slide. This appeared in our local paper a year or so after Katrina on, I think it was on Good Friday of that year. Whatever year, Good Friday was on March 21. And of course, the first frame, there was a stone with that marking, 321. There was one dead body behind that stone. And then 323, the stone was rolled away, the X was across, and now there wasn't anybody dead in that funeral. I used that one Sunday. I made copies of that and passed it to everybody. And I said, God is redeeming our crosses, making them X's. I mentioned Michelle a minute ago, whose husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He died about that time. And on the Sunday I gave this out, she expressed a public faith in Jesus Christ. And she said, I want my life to be redeemed. And she said, if Katrina had not happened, I don't know if I would ever have made this decision. So some good things do come out of storms. So I'm out of time now, so I'll stop at this point. See if you have a question or two.
Thank you very much. So as Kenneth said, if you've got questions, I'll go and stand on this side of the room, and then we can pass you a microphone. Yes.
I was just wondering what the town or the city of New Orleans have put in place in terms of the canals to try and prevent something like this happening in the future if there's another hurricane.
Excellent question, and something substantial has been done. They have put floodgates at the end of the canals so that now when a hurricane is coming, they can raise or lower those gates, and it prevents any water from coming down those canals. So now, even though they've rebuilt the walls along the levees, the walls are now secondary protection. That first protection is the gates that have been built. Water can't come down. So if another Katrina were to happen, we would not flood. In addition, the Corps of Engineers has built a stronger ring around the whole metropolitan area, spent billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars, so that we have higher levees now. So if another Katrina came, none of that area inside this protection ring would flood. Now, we could still get, Katrina was a 100-year storm. If the 1,000-year storm comes, we'll flood again. But hope that won't happen in my lifetime, at least. But excellent question. But substantial work has been done. I'm very happy with that. We feel much safer.
You painted a very optimistic picture about the last few years. It's about 12 years, isn't it, since Katrina?
Yes.
Would you say the city overall is now back to the state that it was in terms of the population, for example, number of people there and so on?
Yeah, population, we had approximately somewhere between 460 and 480,000 before. We're probably up to about maybe 410,000 now. That's a rough estimate. There are probably more exact numbers. So we're not quite up to where we were. Many of those residents have moved to Houston and other places, but we're getting new folks moving in. We're having actually young professionals move into the city now, move into our neighborhood especially now. They're harder to reach than some of the previous residents were. In terms of the rebuilding of the city, we're probably 90% of the homes, maybe, between 85 and 90% of the homes. Roger may have a better figure than I do, but most homes in our neighborhood have been rebuilt. You still see every few blocks a house that's not been completed. But New Orleans will never be the same. but it is functioning normally now. Now that doesn't that can go both ways. New Orleans functioning normally is not always good, but we have life goes on as normal now.
There's a question here first.
Thank you. One of the points that you made when there were a series of points was that people respond to disasters differently. And I was wondering whether you might say something about the experience within the congregation itself and whether there were people who were clearly continuing to experience the effects of trauma for some time, and whether there were tensions within the community and whether there were particular things that you needed to do to bring your congregation through this experience.
Well, first of all, there were some people who just could not deal with a flooded home. We had one set of church members, both husband and wife were chefs, had good jobs. Their house flooded, and they said, we're out of here. They sold their house for whatever they could get for it, moved to Houston, and stayed in Houston. And there were others that just could not deal with the stress of trying to rebuild. Others slogged through it. Some moved back into their homes just after it was gutted and stayed there. Others waited, and of course their house was completely finished. But we provided some counseling. We had a counseling organization that came into our building and worked for several years and then left, and now we've got another counselor in, and they stay busy with counseling. So through that, building relationships, and then, of course, helping as often as we can when a homeowner needs help rebuilding. We try to tie them into a set of volunteers now. They're getting harder to find, skilled volunteers, but we've tried through the years.
So as a pastor, people probably look to you to provide comfort and receive counseling. Where did you get your comfort from? Did you end up finding somebody that counseled you? And how long do you think it took you to kind of recover emotionally from this?
The last part, probably, I was not in good shape for probably 2.5 weeks, But when I got back on a regular sleeping routine, I got all right, and was ready to minister to people then. One thing we had to do is try to find our people. We didn't know where they were. Cell phones weren't working, phones weren't working. So when I was able to go back to New Orleans, I would go to members' houses, and I would get a 1-gallon plastic bag. I had a letter that I had typed up in Xerox. I'm at this place, here's my phone number, call me when you get back. And I'd go to their flooded homes, and all their doors were kicked open from having been searched. So I'd find somewhere to put that in a prominent place, and little by little I began getting calls from Houston, from Atlanta. People called me and said, this is where I am. So folks gradually began coming back. But I found the disaster setting, it probably shows my quirky nature, but I found the opportunity to be involved in that invigorating, and actually gave me strength to do that. Not everybody's like that. Not everybody's made the same. We had one pastor nearby our church who came to New Orleans after Katrina and stayed a year or less. He left saying, I cannot drive through these flooded neighborhoods. It takes something out of me. To me, it put something into me because it said, here's what we can do, here's the opportunities. But it was a process. But I had the trauma for 2 or 3 weeks, and gradually got all right. Thank you for that.
Oh, well, okay, I'll do. You go next. You shared with us last night how you lost nearly all your material possessions, apart from a few plastic boxes. can you tell us, can you reflect on how this changed your own personal faith? Has it changed your personal faith, or have you slipped back into the old ways, which I know I often do?
Yeah. Well, one thing my wife and I say is we won't buy as much stuff anymore. 12 years later, we've got about as much stuff as we had before. But it did strengthen our faith, because when we were down to nothing, it began to be provided for us. We had no flood insurance, and we got very little. Federal Emergency Management Agency gave us $2,000, just kind of stopgap help, but that's the only public help we got. But friends, family, donors to the seminary gave us money so that we were able to replace clothing and furniture and not be harmed financially. Now, I did without a salary from the church for a while, but my seminary salary continued, which is more than my church salary by a long shot. So, but I would say it's greatly increased our faith during this time, greatly. And as Roger has mentioned through his interviews, and Amy and others, many people saw their faith increase through this process. It hurt, but we saw that God is faithful, and that Isaiah 43, when we walk through the waters, He is with us.
I think you might have mentioned this yesterday, but I wasn't here. But you mentioned that right after the hurricane, like, people were asking, will the city come back? Could it and should it? And you mentioned that lots of the pastors moved to different cities to start churches. Did you ever consider, like, what made you come back? Did you ever consider moving?
I didn't. I felt a strong call to New Orleans, and that never diminished. Interestingly, 2 weeks after the storm, I was watching TV one day, I think it was a Sunday, and a church in Atlanta was broadcasting its service. And one of the pastors from New Orleans had been invited to speak there. He was not a Southern Baptist pastor. But he got up and spoke, and he said, New Orleans is through. God has written anathema over New Orleans. We're not going back. And I thought, wow, that's quite a strong statement. But I had intended to go back. A year and a half later, he was calling us, asking if he could rent space from us because he was coming back. And they borrowed our church a number of times to have funerals in because they didn't have a church. And they eventually did come back. So I don't know if anyone ever held him accountable for those words or not, but I haven't forgotten them. Anything else I need to clarify?
How long did it? Sorry. And how long did it and when did you first come back to the city after?
I came back I was able to come back just to check on things 3 weeks after the storm. Was able to come back and check on my house 1 month after the storm, and began coming back weekly for our church services in January, so 4.5 months after the storm. And then our house was, the seminary owns our house, we rent from the seminary, and our house was completed 11 months after the storm, and we moved back at that time.
Roger?
Not to take anything away at all from Gentili, Ken, but would you be able to relay just a little bit about the Vietnamese community out in New Orleans East? I found their story so compelling because talking about disasters before disasters, they'd already come from Vietnam and experienced the horrors of the war there, yes. Come to New Orleans to settle, and then they had to endure what they did.
Yes. There's a large Catholic church in New Orleans East called Mary Queen of Vietnam Catholic Church. There are maybe 6,000 Vietnamese that live in this neighborhood, and they say it's the highest concentration of Vietnamese anywhere in the world outside of Vietnam. Now, not the largest population by any means. There are far more Vietnamese in London than that. Long Beach, California has 100,000 Vietnamese, but it's the highest concentration. Well, everybody's home flooded there as well. They only lost one member, an elderly lady who lived by herself, and somebody didn't check on her, forgot about her, maybe she didn't have children. The priest of the church said that will never happen again. We will make sure that everybody is accounted for. The priest of Mary Queen of Vietnam also began putting together work teams and organizing the people to rebuild the church and to rebuild their homes. So what they did at times, they would help each other rebuild their homes. The whole community would work together. And they were the first to have their homes rebuilt. And at night, they would go to the church and work on the church. So it was a wonderful community. They worked together very harmoniously. And even though they were devastated through this, it's a model still of how when a community works together, and I do think it's a model for how if all of our people could work together the way they did, we would have built back much sooner, much sooner. Thanks for that question.
Okay, Ken, thank you very much indeed. I think we'll draw this session to a close now, so let's just thank Ken again.